I'm excited to be here with Dana McCauley, the CEO of the Canadian Food Innovation Network. Great to see you again, Dana.
Awesome to see you too.
Yeah, you came to Seattle last year, and
Mhm.
it's been great to connect with you over the past 12 months and beyond. And we are going to jump into talk about some of the things happening in the broader macro environment around food, trade relations, and tariffs, et cetera. But before we do that, tell people about CFIN.
Thank you. I love to talk about CFIN. We will be 4 years old on April 1st. So CFIN is a pretty young organization. We're national across Canada, and we exist to help food and beverage businesses reach their full economic potential. So we care about food systems, we care about food security, and we care about, all the things that are out there in the food ecosystem. But ultimately, we're an economic development focused group, and we really strongly believe that developing more food technology and IP-based solutions that existing businesses can adopt and realize their ambitions is a great way to unlock productivity and competitiveness, both here, home and when we're exporting, which is maybe a segue into one of the other topics you mentioned.
You have hundreds, if not thousands, of members, right? I mean, tell us about
We
a little bit about
have
who's the tip.
thousands of members. Yeah, we have over 6,500 members
Oh,
right
wow.
now. And we are getting about 150 new members a month. So we're on track in the next 5 years to have about 20,000 members.
And typical member would be a Canadian-based food company or food ecosystem partner.
Yeah, that would make up the bulk of our membership. We do have international members. It's free to become a member, so a lot of people who are interested in Canada or Canadian companies will join CFIN. 13 or so percent of our members, it moves around depending on, month to month by a percentage here and there, are the innovators, those who are creating new technologies, creating new ingredients, those folks. About 30% are the companies who adopt them. And then everybody in between, investors, people who, are specialists in regulatory and packaging and, all the partners that those two groups need, including academics and researchers and that kind of thing. So it's a really dynamic community, and we share lots of knowledge. We have this online platform, Yodel, that I have the poster for behind my head here, where there's just all kinds of knowledge transfer and lots of tools. We're building a ton of new tools as well, but there's things like a funding finder and a resource finder. And, we just want to make it easy for people to break down innovation barriers, test and learn, and get new products to market.
All right. Well, let's move on to the subject at hand, which I think
Ooh.
is on a lot of people's minds, particularly around the intersection and relation between the U.S. and Canada. I grew up living here in the Seattle area, going to Canada, always feeling like you are close friends of the U.S. partners.
Me
We're
too.
here in North America. And so I've just been kind of shocked and taken back by the antagonistic approach that our new administration is taking towards Canada. I would imagine a lot of the feeling is similar in Canada.
Yes, I think Canadians are a bit blindsided by what's happened. Certainly, we've had trade agreements, we've negotiated trade agreements with the US and many, many other countries. So we understand that, concessions and things have to happen and be agreed upon and papered. But to have an agreement that was signed by the same person who's in power now just get thrown away is confounding. And I'm not going to try and speak for every Canadian, but certainly my members are many are. We're just feeling like off kilter, I guess, because you don't know what's coming from one moment to the next. You've got a game plan and scenario plan. It's such a productivity suck. Instead of working on growing businesses and doing new things, everybody's just scenario planning, and it's, quite frankly, it's kind of exhausting, and it's angering, because we all know that, yeah, if we, this is a race to the bottom for both Canada and the US. If we just keep tariffing each other, right? So I think a lot of people are just like, let's get through this and figure out what the new normal is and game plan from there.
Yeah, and I think chaos almost seems to be the goal to a certain extent. And I don't know what the ultimate motivation is, like who's whispering in Trump's ear. I have some suspicions, but we won't go into that and speculate. But if you look at the perspective of the Canadian food entrepreneur, where I think a big end use market or big market is the US. What does this mean if like, tariffs are being slapped on or like outright kind of hostility towards the food manufacturer in Canada? What does that mean for them in their
Well,
business?
it's very disruptive because it's good for Canada to have a wake up call because you always advise food businesses and businesses of all kinds not to have just one big customer to diversify your client base to be more resilient. So bad on us. But the fact of the matter is food isn't like widgets or tires or anything that's in some of the other supply chains affected by the tariffs. You can't warehouse it indefinitely. It's got a shelf life. So for a lot of companies, their demand planning is completely out the window. They don't know whether they should be producing to fulfill their existing US contracts or whether they should be SKU pruning and diversifying to other markets completely. And just like in auto, there's a lot of stuff that goes back and forth across the border, like packaging. An example that I can draw from my past, I used to work for a company where we sold organic products to
Yeah.
many big US grocers. And, quite often they would contain dairy. Well, Canadian dairy is slightly different. There's one or two small rules that are not the same as in the US. So we would buy American cheese, American dairy products, and bring them to Montreal, where we would turn them into these value-added products, and then ship them across the border. Well, all of a sudden, if you are doing that, and I presume the company I used to work for still does it, that doesn't make any sense anymore. You're not making
Mm-mm.
money, and nobody's going to buy it at the price point you'd have to sell it at to make money. So what do? Do you just quit making it? Yeah, it's a mess, and everybody's trying to figure out how to come out the other end with their staff working and their
Yeah.
businesses
Yeah.
intact. And
Well, there's the obvious impact of tariffs and the higher cost of food coming from the US side, but also there's been the antagonistic kind of rhetoric of Trump. And I think that's resulted in a lot of Canadians saying, hey, we're not going to buy American, we're not going to travel to the
true.
US. Understandably, I completely understand that. Is some of the business driven decisions of food makers who are doing value added products that oftentimes would include American inputs driven by saying, hey, we're not really happy about what he's saying beyond the tariffs. We're not going to buy American.
At the consumer level, that is widespread. You see everybody
Yeah. Yeah.
reading
Yeah.
labels in the grocery store, myself included. I, I'm not going to lie. I have been eating a lot of Mexican zucchini because my preferred vegetable, broccoli and green beans, they are right now in season and coming from the US. So there is definitely, I think, a positive impact on Canadian brands. A lot of people have switched to, coffee roasted in Canada and pickles made locally and that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we're your biggest customer, we being Canada and you being the US. We buy a ton of American products. And, if we continue this way, I think there will be American companies who are negatively impacted, even if the widespread never actually materialize, because people are discovering new brands and changing their habits. And, maybe
Yeah.
in 10 years we'll get back to sort of where we used to be, but maybe not.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, it seems to me, even if Trump were to suddenly change his rhetoric and try to be friendly towards Trudeau and the broader government, it seems like some of this is just going to be permanent damage because how can you trust a neighbor which puts this kind of guy in office,
Yeah.
and you just start to wonder what is the it's just leads to instability over time, and can this be a long-term ally? Can there be that trust there? And it seems like this would be a permanent erosion of that.
You have to imagine. Now, I also am the person who during COVID said people are never going to shake hands again, and I shake hands again. So
Yep.
we don't know what the future holds, but certainly Canada is very well positioned in this moment. In that, out of the G7 countries, we have the most trade agreements out of all of the G7 countries. So we have MOUs and free trade and other types of of trade agreements with, I think, 13 or more different countries. So I think it's pretty obvious, from reading the news, that our new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, this week, his first trip was to Europe, and he met with, France and Britain. And I suspect, nobody tells me what's on the Prime Minister's agenda, but I suspect that he was there to shore up our trade with those two countries and to, make sure that things were in order. I believe, and again, I wasn't really expecting to talk this much about politics, but I'm pretty sure I read that this is the very first time a Canadian Prime Minister's first international trip has not been to the US in decades.
Your customers, your members of your community, what are some of the resources you are providing them as their heads are spinning? They're trying to get used to the tariff firmer under their feet. Like, what are some of the resources you guys are providing them?
So we've kind of formed a bit of an action plan of things that Canada could do to help us, not just in this moment, but long term. So I've been spending a lot of time talking to folks who are working within the government, not necessarily elected officials, but the bureaucrats who are there hopefully long term, and explaining that if we can help Canadian food manufacturers and food service companies and grocery retailers to adopt homemade Canadian technologies, that we will be able to be more competitive both here at home and abroad. I've also talked a little bit with others about how our regulatory bodies in Canada could fast track new technologies that are low risk through health and safety types checks and get them to market more quickly, because those types of innovations will be less price sensitive. Those kinds of things we're doing as just somebody who has a lot of information, because the industry is talking to us constantly. And then on our Yodel thread, we've got people saying, hey, I need aluminum cans for my whatever product. And people saying, I have aluminum cans, I make them, did you never hear of me? And so there's a lot of community support there. And then we're also trying to help the people who are involved in supporting exports for Canada to understand that food tech, as you, thank you, by the way, for covering, you're one of the first people to cover our Food Tech in Canada report that we published on the 4th of February. We're also, saying, hey, look at this. Did you know that there's this mushrooming subsector of food tech, and they're solving problems that, answer global problems, not just Canadian problems. So we're trying to educate the people in the export space to really understand what is food tech, the width, the breadth, the depth, and how they can market it, because we really think that there's a great opportunity for Canada to be an exporter of solutions that benefit other countries, and we'd love to sell them to the U.S. too. But we've got people from around the world who are, kind of inbounding us, and since that report went out, and asking, well, tell us more. What are these companies doing, and how can they help us?
I was just down in San Francisco at the Future Food Tech Conference, and it was an interesting time because I was there last year. What I would call last year was the trough of disillusionment, and kind of everyone was down last year because startups were trying to figure out how to extend their runway, and they were trying to figure out how to preserve capital, because by and large, traditional venture capital sources hadn't completely abandoned it, but like certain categories like protein and plant-based, and certainly cell culture meat, had really seen a disappearance of a lot of the later stage capital they were expecting. When you look at the Canadian market for food tech, how would you characterize what some of the innovators are? What are the kind of the key areas of innovation? What are some of the big companies that are doing interesting stuff up there?
Yeah, so we, it's very broad, what we have. There's people working in almost every domain, but the domains where we really seem to be showing, leadership and differentiation and momentum would be in plant-based foods, but not necessarily the finished products. We're really great at ingredients, and that's serving us very, very well. It's well over $1 billion of GDP just from that part of our food tech subsector. We've got an amazingly good education system here in Canada, and we have tons of STEM graduates who have masters and PhDs, and they are starting all kinds of really great companies in the biotech side. So you mentioned cultivated meat. Beyond that, though, biotech also encompasses a lot of functional ingredients, and Canada is creating a lot of great ones, sometimes from side streams that otherwise would be waste, but also by just using really good science and precision fermentation, that kind of thing. And then we also, going back to that side stream comment, we are real leaders in the upcycled and waste reduction space. So a company in each of those categories. So in that plant-based space would be two that I could mention, and they were both at Future Food Tech. Maybe you met them. One is Maya Farms, who's creating protein blocks from mycelium. That's the root system, basically, of mushrooms. Another is New School Foods, which last year did a lot at Future Food Tech, some tastings and stuff. And their end game is actually to create whole muscle textured meats. So they're basically an equipment manufacturer in the end, but they've launched a salmon product that is, got the flakiness and succulence of natural salmon, even though it's made from potato starch, is completely vegan. Then on that, ingredient side, companies like Inidal from Quebec City, they've created a clean label antimicrobial that the meat sector is just loving and embracing, because you can extend the shelf life of fresh proteins, and you also reduce the food safety risks with it. And then on upcycling side, there's just so many. One that is one of my favorites is Food Cycle Science, who has found a way to work not just with home composting, but with food service composting, to create a soil amendment in just like 24 hours from the waste, not just of the food waste, but also of all those potato starch and other, sort of compostable kinds of items that restaurants have adopted that don't necessarily break down as fast as we'd like them to. So there's a lot happening. We've got well over 220 established food tech companies, and probably a vast majority of them would fall into those three categories.
All right, stepping back from food tech and just let's talk about food. I was talking to someone earlier this week that just tell me how they think Toronto's food is actually better than New York City's. So
that's an age-old conversation.
Yeah. But tell, for people who aren't accustomed to going to Canada, what are some of the great food cities, or what are some of the key areas that you would recommend?
So, I'm trained as a chef originally, and I was a chef in Toronto. My husband, fine dining restaurant owner, all that stuff. So bias admitted. I do think that there's this golden triangle of food cities in the Northeast, with Toronto, Chicago, New York. And there's a lot of cross-pollination of ideas and staff in the past between those restaurants. So, but what makes Toronto different from the other two is that we don't have that melting pot approach to immigration. So we have really great, really authentic, like we have a Michelin-starred Thai restaurant in Toronto called Pi that is very accessible. Like my son and I will, when I'm in the city, we'll pop in there and have a casual dinner together. But it's so authentic Northern Thai, very authentic ethnic cuisines, because we have these diaspora communities. But Vancouver is an amazing, amazing food city. Some fantastic chefs doing really great, farm to table and hyper local cuisine, but also amazing Japanese food, because there's so many Japanese people who have, moved to Canada and found, a common climate and vibe in Vancouver. But you know what? I don't think there's a city in Canada that I've visited that doesn't have something. It can be really humble. Like I was in Winnipeg last week. I went to the Dakota Community Center and had some of the best, I'm half Ukrainian, by the way, so this is going to mean a lot. I had some of the best Ukrainian food I literally have ever had at a hockey rink's concession.
Amazing.
Again, it's that diaspora piece.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do is head up from Seattle into Vancouver on the train and just go up that coastal waterfront and then head into Vancouver. And there's such good food there. It's one of my favorite cities. And so always love traveling to Canada, and always love talking to you, Dana. Thank you for telling us a little bit more about what you do every day and about CFIN.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm glad you come to Canada. We need smart people like you bringing great ideas to us. So Thanks for that.
Thanks, Dana.